My day didn't begin with the sun or the alarm clock. It began with an absence. A hollow. A smooth, pale ghost on my left ring finger where 20 years of marriage used to sit. The skin, sheltered for 2 decades, was tender and foreign. There was no weight. No cold circle of gold. Just an indentation. A silent scream in my skin. It wasn't just my ring. It was my mother's ring. The last piece of her I owned. The one thing she'd placed in my hand on her deathbed, whispering, "This holds all our strength. Never let it go." Panic, icy and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. My breath hitched. It had to be here. It had to. I probably took it off to do the dishes last night. I stumbled out of bed, the sheets cold on Jacob's side. He was long gone, off to Ethelred Corp to build his empire while I managed mine. The silent, thankless one contained within these 4 walls. "Jacob," I called out, a useless question hurled into the empty air. The silence that answered was a heavy blanket smothering me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I rushed to the kitchen sink. I checked the small ceramic dish, the one I'd bought at a farmer's market years ago, where I sometimes left it. Empty. I ran my fingers along the grout, around the faucet, my movements growing more frantic. Nothing. My mind started replaying last night. Dinner. Cleaning up. Watching that show Jacob liked, the one I found boring but pretended to enjoy. I remembered my hand resting on his knee. The ring was there. I was sure of it. I never ever took it off to sleep. It was a part of me, an extension of my bone. I tore back to the bedroom, my bare feet cold against the polished hardwood. I ripped the duvet off the bed, shaking it out with a violent snap of fabric. Pillows were thrown to the floor. I dropped to my knees, my hands sweeping under the bed, encountering only dust bunnies and a forgotten slipper. My nightstand. I pulled the drawer out so hard it came off its runners, spilling its contents. A half-read book, lip balm, a tangle of charging cables. No ring. I checked the pockets of the robe I'd worn last night, hanging on the back of the door. Empty. The bathroom. I sifted through the jewelry box, even though I knew it wouldn't be there. It never was. I unscrewed the U-bend under the sink, my stomach churning at the gunk that spilled out, my fingers probing through the disgusting mess. Nothing. Each empty space was another small, sharp jab of fear. This was wrong. This was deeply wrong. My mother's ring. It had survived a world war on her grandmother's hand, a perilous boat journey on my mother's, and now it was gone from mine, in the safety of my own suburban home. An hour passed in this frantic, spiraling ballet of desperation. I searched the laundry hamper, sifting through dirty clothes. I checked the pockets of Jacob's jeans from yesterday. I looked in the freezer, the sugar bowl, the crisper drawer in the fridge. All the absurd places your mind goes when logic has failed you. The house, once my sanctuary, felt like a labyrinth of loss, every corner mocking me with its emptiness. I slumped onto the living room sofa, exhausted and trembling. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, indifferent to my private apocalypse. I had to calm down. I needed to think. Maybe Jacob had seen it. Maybe he'd picked it up for safekeeping. He was always telling me I was careless, that I lived in my own little world. Maybe this was his way of proving a point. I picked up my phone to call him but then hesitated. He would be in meetings. He hated being interrupted. The familiar sting of feeling like a nuisance, an interruption to his important life, stopped my thumb from pressing the call button. I would wait. I would search one more time, slowly, methodically. To distract myself, to quiet the screaming in my head, I opened Instagram. Pointless habit. A mindless scroll through the curated perfection of other people's lives. Filtered smiles. Exotic vacations. Professional triumphs. It was usually a form of benign self-torture, but today it was a lifeline to a world that was still turning. A world where precious things didn't just vanish into thin air. I saw a friend's new puppy, a cousin's trip to the Grand Canyon, an ad for a meal delivery service. Numbness began to settle in my limbs. And that's when I saw it. The sponsored post appeared, wedged between a sunset and a smoothie bowl. It wasn't an ad. It was a local influencer, a lifestyle blogger, Chloe Vance. The name was familiar. Young, bright, raven-haired. Jacob had mentioned her. She was a rising star in his marketing department. He'd called her a go-getter, a real shark. I remembered feeling a faint, pointless flicker of insecurity at the time. The photo was a close-up. Just her hand, perfectly manicured, resting on what looked like a man's chest, the fabric of his dark blazer visible in the background. And on her finger, sparkling under the professionally lit studio lights, was a ring. A diamond solitaire, set in a delicate, hand-carved gold band with a distinctive filigree of entwined ivy leaves. My ring. My mother's ring. The air left my body in a single silent gasp. My vision tunneled. The world outside the glowing rectangle of my phone ceased to exist. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence. A similar design. It had to be. But I knew the truth. I knew every curve, every tiny worn-down leaf on that band. I knew the way the light caught the diamond's one microscopic flaw near the prong. A flaw only a person who had stared at it for thousands of hours would ever know. It was there, glistening on another woman's hand. My eyes scanned the caption, the letters blurring and sharpening. A new chapter begins. Feeling like the luckiest girl in the world, I said yes. It was followed by a string of emojis, a ring, a heart, a champagne bottle. A new chapter. My chapter, my mother's chapter, my grandmother's chapter. All of it, ending so a new one could begin for her. My thumb, trembling uncontrollably, scrolled down to the comments. Hundreds of them. Congratulations. Odes to how beautiful the ring was. And then I saw the name. The profile picture was of him, smiling on a golf course. Jacob. My Jacob. His official verified account. And his words, there for the entire world to see, were a blade sliding between my ribs. My future, my everything. I love you. The phone slipped from my nerveless fingers and clattered onto the hardwood floor. I am the scent of fresh-baked lemon bars for the annual school fundraiser. A recipe passed down from my mother. I am the patient hands that prune the climbing roses on our porch, coaxing them into a cascade of crimson that is the quiet envy of the neighborhood. I am the gracious hostess of polite dinner parties. The kind where the crystal glasses chime and the conversation is a low, comfortable hum. At these gatherings I am a ghost in my own home, gliding between the kitchen and the dining room, ensuring every glass is full, every plate is warm. I watch Jacob, my Jacob, hold court at the head of the table. He speaks with passion about his important, demanding job at the fintech giant, Ethelred Corporation. He talks of market trends and quarterly reports, of the pressures of his position. Our guests nod impressed. And I smile, a soft, supportive smile that I have perfected over 2 decades. It is my role. The role of a lifetime. And I have always believed I played it perfectly. I remember the day I decided to embrace this role. We were young, so young. We had just found this house with its big oak tree in the front yard. The paint was peeling and the floors creaked, but I saw the future in its bones. Jacob was ambitious, a brilliant spark I knew could set the world on fire if given the right fuel. I was working at a high-pressure firm in the city, my days a blur of numbers and projections. I was good at it. Very good. But one evening I came home late, the scent of the city still clinging to my suit, and found Jacob asleep on the couch, a stack of legal pads filled with his ideas for Ethelred resting on his chest. In that quiet moment, watching him, a profound clarity washed over me. The world had enough brilliant sparks. What he needed was a steady flame, a constant warmth to come home to. So I made a choice. I chose him. I chose us. I chose the quiet rhythm of a life lived in support of another's dream. I never saw it as a sacrifice, not really. There was a unique and profound joy in it. I found purpose in the perfect fold of a napkin, in the triumphant rise of a soufflé. I found meaning in soothing a child's fever in the dead of night, in the quiet pride of watching them walk across the stage at their graduation. These were the dividends of my investment, and for a long time they felt richer than any stock portfolio. I created a sanctuary, a world insulated from the harsh angles and cold calculations of the one-eyed left behind. A place where my husband could recharge, where our children could flourish. I was the architect of this small, perfect world, and its seamless operation was my masterpiece. When Jacob would come home, his shoulders heavy with the weight of his work, I would be there. I'd listen as he vented about boardroom politics, about impossible deadlines and demanding superiors. I'd offer a sympathetic ear, a soothing back rub, a glass of his favorite scotch. "You're building an empire, Jacob," I'd tell him, my voice a soft murmur in the quiet of our living room. "It's supposed to be hard." He would look at me then, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something I always mistook for awe. He called me his anchor, his secret weapon, the one who made it all possible. And I believed him. I held on to those words, polishing them like precious stones, arranging them in the mosaic of my identity. I was Jacob's wife, the woman behind the man. But there is another name. A name no one in Havenwood Creek has ever heard. A name that exists only on a handful of heavily encrypted servers, and in the hushed, reverent whispers of a very small, very loyal legal team. It's a name that doesn't belong at a PDA meeting or a garden club luncheon. A name I answer to in the dead of night, when the house is still and my other life is asleep. Arcane. That's the name on the original incorporation documents for Ethelred Corporation. The A for Annabelle, my mother's name. The R for Rose, hers as well. A quiet tribute to the woman who taught me that a woman's mind was her most valuable asset. I am not just a part of Ethelred Corporation. I am its source code. I founded it, not in a sleek high-rise, but from the cluttered chaos of my MIT dorm room. It was born from an algorithm I designed, a revolutionary piece of code scribbled on the back of a napkin in the student union between sips of lukewarm coffee. It was my brilliant spark, my potential to set the world on fire. I am the anonymous sole majority shareholder, the ghost in the machine. When the company grew beyond what I could manage alone, I put a board of directors in place, trusted colleagues and mentors from my past, and I stepped back. I vanished. I became a myth, a reclusive genius whose identity was the most closely guarded secret in the financial world. And I did it all for one reason. I did it for Jacob. I met him a year after Ethelred was already a quiet success story in the making. He was charming, intelligent, and driven, but he had no idea who I was. He saw Eliana, the sharp, witty grad student who could hold her own in any debate. He didn't see the silent owner of a burgeoning tech empire. And in that I saw an opportunity, a chance to run the most important experiment of my life. Could a man like him, a man of such towering ambition, love Eliana the woman? Or would the gravity of Arcane's fortune inevitably eclipse her? I wanted a love that was real, untainted by the decimal points and the dollar signs. I wanted a partner who saw my value in our conversations over dinner, not in my company's valuation on the stock market. So I let him believe I was just starting out. And when his own career path led him, by a coincidence I may have gently engineered, to a mid-level position at Ethelred, the experiment began in earnest. I watched from the shadows as he climbed the corporate ladder of the very company I owned. I listened as he complained about the board's decisions, my decisions. I celebrated his promotions, feigning surprise and delight, all while knowing I had read the quarterly review that guaranteed his ascent. I lived a dual life, a paradox of immense power and deliberate powerlessness. I held the fate of thousands of employees and billions of dollars in my hands, yet I asked my husband for a weekly allowance to run our household, an allowance paid from the salary that my own company paid him. For 20 years the experiment was running, 2 decades of playing a part, of biting my tongue in conversations about a world I knew more intimately than he could ever imagine. 20 years of watching him, studying him, waiting for the definitive, unassailable proof that his love was genuine. It was a lonely, isolating performance. There were times I almost broke character, moments when his condescension about my little hobbies, or my lack of understanding of the real world, felt like a physical blow. But I held on. I held on for the sake of the experiment, for the sake of the life I had so painstakingly built. Now, sitting in the silence of my perfect house, the morning sun glinting off the dust motes in the air, I feel the chill of a conclusion. The experiment isn't running anymore. It's over. The data has been collected, the variables all accounted for. And as the image of my mother's ring on another woman's hand burns behind my eyes, I understand. I have my results. The betrayal wasn't a sudden storm. It was a change in the climate of our home, so gradual that I almost didn't notice the air growing thinner, colder, until I was struggling to breathe. It didn't start with the chilling emptiness on my finger this morning. No, it began years ago, in 1,000 tiny moments that chipped away at my soul. It was death by 1,000 insults, each one a paper cut, seemingly harmless on its own, but collectively they bled me dry. I remember the dinner parties. They were his stage and I was part of the set dressing. He'd stand by the fireplace, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, holding court with his colleagues from Ethelred Corporation. I would be passing canapes I'd spent all day preparing, and he'd gesture towards me with a grand, magnanimous sweep of his arm. "Eliana," he'd announce to the room, his voice dripping with condescension masked as affection. "She handles the small stuff. You know, the things that make life comfortable. I handle the big picture." Then he'd reach out and pat my head. Not a caress, not a loving stroke, but a pat. The kind you give a golden retriever that has successfully fetched a ball. The room would chuckle politely, some of the wives offering me thin, pitying smiles. And I would smile back, a perfect hollow expression I had mastered, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks as I retreated to the kitchen, my worth defined and dismissed in a single paternalistic gesture. Then there were the budget meetings. That's what he called them. Once a month, he would sit me down at the polished mahogany dining table, a table bought with the first dividend check from my company, though he didn't know that. He'd slide a meticulously organized spreadsheet across the table. "Our finances," he'd say, his tone grave, as if he were the Secretary of the Treasury addressing a fiscal crisis. It was a breakdown of his salary, his generous salary, and a strict allocation for every household expense. Groceries, utilities, a small allowance for what he called my personal frivolities. He would point a manicured finger at a line item. "I see we went over on organic produce last month, honey. Is that really necessary? We need to be a team here, tighten the belt." I would sit there, my hands clasped in my lap, and nod. I would nod while my mind calculated the interest earned on my Ethelred stock portfolio in the last 24 hours alone. The dividends from my shares, held in a trust he could never touch, could buy this entire town. I could buy the organic farm, the grocery store, the delivery truck. I could buy his big picture and sell it for scrap. But I'd just look at the numbers he'd presented, this pathetic little slice of the financial pie he allowed me to see, and I'd say, "You're right, Jacob. I'll be more careful." The humiliation was a physical thing. A sour taste in the back of my throat. He was lecturing a queen on how to manage the budget of a shoebox, and he was so proud of himself for it. My opinions were treated like a child's scribbles. I tried to engage in conversations he was having on the phone with his colleagues, conversations about market trends and corporate strategy that I understood better than he ever could. I'd offer a suggestion, a nuanced perspective on a competitor's recent move. He would hold up a hand to silence me, his eyes still on his laptop screen. "Leave the thinking to me, honey," he'd murmur, his focus already elsewhere. "This is complex stuff." He'd say it with a sigh, as if my attempt to participate was a burden, a tiresome distraction from the important work of men. He had built his entire career inside the empire I had created, yet he treated me as if I lacked the mental capacity to balance a checkbook. And the most soul-crushing part? I let him. I played the part of the simple, supportive wife so well that I think for a time I even started to believe it myself. Each condescending word, each dismissive gesture, was another lock on the cage I had willingly stepped into 20 years ago. The cage got smaller when the late nights started. They began subtly. A project deadline, a last-minute meeting. I understood. I wanted him to succeed. I made sure a hot dinner was waiting for him no matter the hour. But the late nights bled into a pattern, becoming 3, then 4 times a week. The excuses became flimsier, more rehearsed. A faint, cloying scent of a perfume that wasn't mine would cling to his suit jacket. A credit card receipt for a dinner for 2 at a restaurant we'd never been to, tucked carelessly into his pocket. The first time I gathered the courage to ask, my voice was a tremor. "You're home late again, Jacob. Is everything all right at the office?" His transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. It was like watching a mask shatter. The charming, affable man he performed for the world vanished, replaced by a stranger with cold, hard eyes. He dropped his briefcase on the floor with a loud thud that made me jump. "Is that what this is?" he snarled, his voice a low growl. "An interrogation? I kill myself day in and day out working my fingers to the bone to provide for this family, to give you this beautiful house, this comfortable life, and this is the thanks I get? Accusations." My heart hammered against my ribs. "No, I was just worried." "Worried?" He laughed, a short, ugly sound devoid of humor. "Or are you just bored? Sitting around this big empty house all day? Your mind starts to invent things. You're becoming paranoid, Eliana." He stepped closer, invading my space, his sheer physical presence designed to intimidate, to make me feel small. "Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? To come home exhausted, hoping for a little peace, and instead I walk into an ambush? To be treated like a criminal by my own wife." The guilt was a tidal wave, swift and overwhelming, drowning my nascent suspicion. He was the master of this theater. He could twist my genuine concern into a venomous attack, casting himself as the noble martyr and me as the unhinged, ungrateful shrew. My questions were not questions. They were symptoms of my insanity. My feelings were not valid. They were evidence of my paranoia. I would back down, of course. "I'm sorry," I'd whisper, my eyes fixed on the floor. "You're right. I'm just being silly. You must be exhausted." And then the performance would shift again. The anger would recede, replaced by a look of wounded tenderness. He'd sigh, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry I snapped," he'd say, his voice soft again. "I'm just under so much pressure. And when you don't trust me, it just breaks my heart." He would pull me into an embrace that felt more like a capture, his arms a cage. I was his captive audience, trapped in the front row of his one-man show, forced to applaud his performance every single night. I learned to stop asking. I learned to ignore the perfume, the receipts, the lies in his eyes. I learned to swallow my questions until they became a permanent, bitter lump in my throat. I chose a quiet, poisoned peace over his theatrical rage. For years I endured the cuts, the public humiliations, the private dismissals, the psychological warfare. I absorbed them, normalized them, buried them under the placid exterior of the perfect wife. I told myself it was the price of admission for a stable life, for the family I thought we were building. I made excuses. "He's stressed. He doesn't mean it. This is just how marriage is." But stealing my mother's ring, that was different. That wasn't a cut. That was a gaping mortal wound. That ring was not just a piece of gold and diamond. It was the last tangible piece of my mother I had. I remember the day she gave it to me, a week before my wedding. Her hands, already frail from her illness, trembled as she slipped it from her own finger and placed it onto mine. Her knuckles were swollen, but her eyes were bright. "This ring," she had whispered, her voice raspy but firm. "It represents the strength of the women in our family. My mother wore it through the Great Depression. I wore it when I was building my business from nothing. It's not about marriage, Eliana. It's about resilience. It's a reminder that you come from a line of women who build empires, even when no one is watching. Never forget who you are." It was a legacy, a sacred trust. It had sat on my finger for 20 years, a silent source of strength, a connection to the woman who had believed in me more than anyone. And Jacob knew it. He knew the story. I had told him through tears after she passed. He had held my hand, looked at the ring, and promised he would always honor her memory. To see that ring, my mother's ring, my grandmother's ring, sparkling on the finger of another woman on a social media post, it was a desecration. He didn't just take an object. He took my history. He took my mother's memory and handed it to his mistress as a cheap promise. He was trying to overwrite my past, to erase the lineage of strong women I came from, and build his tawdry new future on its ashes. He hadn't just been unfaithful to me. He had been unfaithful to the very core of who I was, to the legacy that pulsed in my veins. I stared at the image on my phone, the blood draining from my face. Chloe Vance's manicured hand, the stolen ring on her finger, Jacob's loving comment underneath. The 1,000 cuts I had endured over the years suddenly coalesced into a single sharp point of unbearable clarity. The fog of denial, of accommodation, of fear, was burned away by a white-hot rage. He hadn't just broken a promise. He had committed an act of symbolic violence, an attempt to annihilate my identity. The woman who would have cried, who would have confronted him only to be beaten down by his psychological games, who would have accepted his apologies and lies, that woman was gone. She died at precisely 10 a.m., staring at a picture on a glowing screen. Something new, something cold and hard and powerful, clicked into place within my chest. It was the sound of a sleeping queen awakening to find her kingdom in ruins and her crown on the head of a fool. He thought he was erasing me. He had no idea he was resurrecting the one person he should have feared all along. At 10:01 a.m., A.R. Kane, the founder and architect of his entire world, was wide awake. And she was ready to burn it all to the ground. The numbness that followed the initial shock was a strange gift. It was a cold, clear space where the screaming emotions had been. In that silence, I saw the path forward not as a series of choices, but as a single immutable line. My life as Eliana, the supportive wife, the quiet homemaker, had been a role I played. The performance was over. The woman who built an empire from her dorm room at MIT, the woman known only as A.R. Kane, was taking the stage. I picked up my phone. My fingers didn't tremble. I scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in years, though I knew it by heart. The name on the screen was simply Arthur. For 2 decades, Arthur Vance had been my corporate counsel, my consigliere, my secret keeper. He was the only other living soul who knew that the reclusive, phantom-like founder of Ethelred Corp was currently standing in a sun-drenched kitchen, dressed in yoga pants and a faded t-shirt. He answered on the first ring, as he always did. His voice was calm, professional, unchanged by the years. "Miss Kane, to what do I owe the pleasure?" He never used my first name on an open line. Old habits. "Arthur," I said, and the voice that came out was not my own. It was a voice I hadn't used since I'd last sat in a boardroom. It was low, devoid of warmth, polished steel. "It's time." A beat of silence on his end. Not of surprise but of profound, somber understanding. He knew what this meant. He knew the years of quiet observation were over. "The contingency we discussed?" he asked, his own voice shifting, becoming less the friendly lawyer and more the wartime general. "The protocol?" "Yes," I said, my eyes drifting to the empty space on my finger where my mother's ring should be. "Activate the Kingmaker protocol." That was our code. The phrase we had devised all those years ago for this exact scenario, the one I prayed would never come. It was the trigger for a cascade of legal and corporate maneuvers that would end with me, A.R. Kane, assuming my rightful public place as CEO of Ethelred Corporation. The ghost was about to materialize. "Understood," Arthur said. The gravity in his voice was immense. "I'll convene an emergency virtual session with the board. I'll need your proxy authorization. The standard digital signature will suffice." "It's already in your inbox," I replied, having sent it seconds before dialing. "I'll be listening in on a muted line." "Of course," he said. "Eliana, are you certain?" He used my name, a rare break in his own protocol, a sign of his concern not for the company but for me. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I said, and the line went dead. The quiet that followed was different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the hum of a vast machine, gears turning, levers shifting, all at my command. The emergency board meeting was a disaster, just as I knew it would be. I sat at my kitchen island, laptop open, my microphone and camera off. A ghost listening to the panicked voices of the men and women who ran my company. Arthur's face was a mask of professional calm on the screen, a stark contrast to the 5 other faces in their Brady Bunch boxes. Marcus Thorne, the chairman of the board, a man I'd personally selected 15 years ago for his perceived loyalty, looked like he'd swallowed a wasp. "Let me be perfectly clear, Arthur," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are telling us that A.R. Kane, our silent, enigmatic founder, has decided after 2 decades of complete anonymity to suddenly take the reins as CEO? And that this person is who exactly?" Arthur didn't flinch. "As per the founder's bylaws, which you are all intimately familiar with, A.R. Kane's identity is not subject to board approval. The bylaws are also clear that the majority shareholder, holding 58% of all voting stock, reserves the right to assume the chief executive position at any time, with or without cause. Another board member, a woman named Cynthia, who ran our European division, spoke up. But who is she? What are her qualifications? The market will panic. A complete unknown dropping into the C-suite? Our stock will be decimated. We have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders to prevent that. My hand tightened on my coffee mug. Our shareholders? I was the shareholder, the only one who truly mattered. They had grown fat and comfortable on my creation, on the dividends from my genius, and they had the audacity to question me. Arthur cleared his throat. Miss Kane's qualifications are, with all due respect, the company itself. She built it. Every core patent, every piece of foundational code, bears her digital fingerprints. Marcus scoffed, a dismissive, ugly sound. Code written 20 years ago. This is a different world. We need a seasoned executive, a public face, not a reclusive programmer. We have no idea who this person is. For all we know, she's a housewife in Ohio. The word hung in the virtual air. Housewife. He said it like a slur, like the most disqualifying, contemptible thing a person could be. A hot white rage, pure and clean, burned away the last vestiges of the woman I had pretended to be. I watched his smug face, the faces of the others nodding in agreement, and I understood. They didn't see the architect of their fortunes. They saw a threat, an unknown variable that might upset their comfortable, predictable world. The board will not stand for this, Marcus declared, his voice rising. We will fight this. We will file an injunction. We will take it to court. We will argue that this move is a reckless endangerment of the company's stability. We will protect Ethelred from its own founder if we have to. Arthur remained impassive. You are, of course, free to pursue any legal action you deem appropriate, Marcus. However, I would remind you of Section 4, Clause 11b of the Corporate Charter. The scorched earth provision. Any legal action taken by the board to obstruct the majority shareholders' right to assume command will be met with an immediate, full liquidation of all of Ms. Kane's shares on the open market. The silence was instantaneous and absolute. The color drained from Marcus Thorne's face. The smugness vanished, replaced by a raw primal fear. Liquidation of 58% of the company's stock would not just crater the price, it would be an extinction-level event. It would vaporize Ethelred Corp., and their careers and fortunes along with it. They were trapped. They knew it. I had built the cage they were sitting in. Inform the staff, Arthur said into the stunned silence, his voice now carrying the full weight of my authority. There will be an all-hands, company-wide assembly in the main auditorium in 72 hours. A.R. Kane will be there to personally address her employees. He didn't wait for a response. He simply disconnected, leaving them to stare at each other's terrified faces. I closed my laptop. The first obstacle had been met. They hadn't seen a housewife. They had seen a queen checking their king, and they had no moves left. They were about to learn who held the real power. But the war wasn't just in the boardroom. A far more insidious battle was being waged in my own home. Jacob must have sensed the shift in the atmosphere between us, the new layer of ice in my voice, the way I no longer looked him in the eye. He misinterpreted my cold fury as hurt, a wound he thought he could soothe with his usual manipulative balm. He launched a campaign of emotional warfare, a full-scale charm offensive. It began with flowers. A massive bouquet of white lilies, my favorite, arrived with a card. I've been a stressed-out jerk. Forgive me. All my love, Jay. I stared at them, their funereal scent filling the kitchen. The last time he'd sent me lilies was after our first major fight, 20 years ago. The gesture now felt obscene. A hollow echo of a man who no longer existed, if he ever had. I left them on the counter to wilt. That evening he came home early, clutching a bottle of our favorite Chardonnay, the expensive kind we saved for anniversaries. He found me in the living room reading. He knelt before me, his expression a carefully crafted mask of contrition. Eliana, baby, we need to talk, he said, his voice soft and pleading. I know I've been distant. Work has been a nightmare. I've been under incredible pressure, and I've taken it out on you. That's not fair. I'm so sorry. He tried to take my hand, but I moved it away. I'm tired, Jacob. I know you are, he said, his eyes brimming with false sincerity. That's why I did something. I booked us a trip. 2 weeks. Tuscany. Remember that little villa we stayed in for our 10th anniversary? The one with the lemon groves? I booked it. Just for us. No phones, no work. We can reconnect, find our way back to each other. For one terrifying, sickening moment I wavered. The memory of that trip, the warmth of the Tuscan sun, the taste of the wine, the feeling of his hand in mine as we walked through the olive trees. It all came rushing back. 20 years of shared life, of building a home, of inside jokes and quiet moments. Was I really about to burn all of it to the ground? Was this whole nightmare just a terrible mistake? A midlife crisis on his part that we could work through? The serpent's charm was potent. His words were a poison designed to make me doubt my own reality, to make me feel like the unreasonable one, the one destroying everything. My resolve, which had felt like granite, suddenly felt like sand. And then, as he looked at me with those pleading, dishonest eyes, a different image burned through the haze of nostalgia. It was a crystal-clear picture from Chloe Vance's Instagram feed. My mother's ring. The intricate gold work, the unique setting of the diamond, sparkling on her finger. His comment beneath it. My future, my everything. The doubt vanished, burned away by a fresh wave of revulsion. He wasn't just a man who had made a mistake. He was a man who had desecrated a memory, stolen a sacred piece of my past, and handed it to someone else as a promise for his future. A future that didn't include me. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time I saw the stranger he had become. Or perhaps the stranger he had always been. Tuscany sounds lovely, I said, my voice flat and empty. But I'm afraid I'll be far too busy. I stood up and walked away, leaving him kneeling on the floor. The mask of contrition slipping to reveal the flicker of confusion and anger beneath. The battle for my heart was over. The war for my empire had just begun. The conversation with Arthur the next day was blunt. The board is cornered, but they're not stupid, he said over our secure line. They'll fall in line for now, but the second you falter, they'll pounce. The same goes for Jacob. A simple divorce for infidelity can be dragged out. He could claim emotional distress, years of marital contribution. He'll try to paint you as a vindictive, scorned wife and walk away with a settlement that would make a king blush. I don't want him to have a single cent of my money, Arthur, I said, my voice cold. He stole my mother's ring. He doesn't get to steal my company, too. Then we need more, Arthur said. We need something undeniable. Something that warrants immediate, summary dismissal for gross misconduct. Something that invalidates any claim he could possibly make to marital assets derived from the company. We need to prove he isn't just an unfaithful husband, but a liability to the corporation. It was then that I authorized it. I knew it was a long shot, a desperate move, but the image of that ring demanded it. I want a full deep dive internal audit on his entire division, I told Arthur. Effective immediately. Spare no expense. I want to know everything. Every expense report, every vendor contract, every travel request for the last 10 years. It's a wide net, Arthur cautioned. We might not find anything. Then we'll have lost nothing but time, I replied. But if there's something there, I want it found. Arthur hired the best forensic accounting team in the country. They descended on Ethelred's digital records like ghosts, silent and unseen. For days I heard nothing. The house was quiet. Jacob was treading on eggshells, alternating between wounded puppy looks and frustrated sighs. A constant low-level psychological assault I learned to ignore. My focus was elsewhere, on the impending all-hands meeting, on the speech I was writing, on the woman I was becoming again. Then, late one night, I received a priority-flagged email from Arthur. The subject line was a single word. Anomaly. Attached was a file, and a request for an immediate, encrypted video call. A young woman appeared on my screen. She looked barely 30 with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. This was Anya, the lead forensic accountant. Arthur was on the call as well, his face grim. Miss Kane, Anya began, her voice crisp and professional. We started with a standard keyword algorithm, cross-referencing expense reports with Jacob's corporate travel. Standard procedure. But I also ran a secondary diagnostic, a pattern recognition program I developed myself. It flags micro-discrepancies in vendor invoicing, things that usually fly under the radar. She shared her screen. It was a complex spreadsheet, a wall of numbers and code. My eyes, trained for this work, immediately began to parse it. Most corporate fraud is big and clumsy, she explained, her cursor hovering over a single, highlighted line item. This is not. This is elegant. For the past 5 years, every quarter, Jacob's division has onboarded a new consulting or supply vendor. The invoices are always for small, plausible amounts, just under the $10,000 threshold that requires senior VP approval. They're for things like synergistic marketing solutions or logistical support services. Vague corporate speak nonsense. Ghost vendors, I murmured, a cold feeling starting to creep up my spine. Precisely, Anya said. The companies are all LLCs registered in Delaware. Untraceable for the most part. But the payments are consistent. Regular as a heartbeat. The amounts are always slightly different, random-looking, so they don't trigger automated flags for duplicate payments. But when you map them out over 5 years... She switched screens. A graph appeared. It showed dozens of small payments, a constellation of dots that, when viewed from a distance, formed a horrifyingly clear upward trend. A slow, steady siphoning of money. It's small, clever amounts, she continued. A few thousand here, 8,000 there. Funneled through these fake vendor accounts. Over a year it adds up. Over 5 years. She paused, letting the weight of her next words land. We're projecting a total of just over $4.7 million. $4.7 million. The number didn't compute at first. It was an abstraction. But then the reality crashed down on me. For 5 years, while I was managing our tight household budget, while he was complaining about taxes and the rising cost of living, while he was making me feel small for wanting to renovate the kitchen. For 5 years he had been systematically, methodically stealing from me. From the company I had bled for, sacrificed for, built from nothing. The betrayal of the affair was a knife to the heart. This was different. This was parasitic. He had attached himself to me, to my life's work, and had been feeding off it in secret, draining it drop by drop. He wasn't just a cheating husband who had disrespected my love and my mother's memory. He was a common thief. A cheap, sordid embezzler hiding behind a designer suit and a charming smile. The last shred of doubt, the last wisp of nostalgia for the man I thought I married, evaporated into nothing. There was no going back. There was no us to save. There was only the company, my company, and the man who had tried to bleed it dry. The man I was about to destroy. The gentle tremor of suspicion had become a ground-rupturing earthquake. And from the ruins Arcane was finally fully awake that I became an artist of deceit, a method actor in the theater of my own home. My role was simple. The adoring, slightly dim, utterly supportive wife. My performance began each morning with the gentle press of a freshly ironed shirt into Jacob's hands and ended each night with a feigned, sleepy sigh as he turned his back to me in our bed. The days between were filled with the quiet hum of domesticity. I baked his favorite lemon drizzle cake, the scent of citrus and sugar a deliberate lie filling the air. I arranged flowers in the hall, their vibrant, living beauty a stark contrast to the decay of our marriage. I played the fool and I played it to perfection. He would come home from work, his briefcase slapping against his thigh. A swagger in his step that spoke of a man who believed he was the king of his castle. He'd loosened his tie, a gesture of a man shedding the burdens of the world. A world I was supposedly not equipped to understand. Tough day, Ellie, he'd sigh, dropping onto the sofa and kicking off his shoes with an air of entitlement. He'd gesture vaguely. Just board-level stuff. Strategy. You wouldn't get it. Of course, dear. I'd say, my voice a soft, soothing balm. I'd bring him a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the light, the ice clinking a delicate, false rhythm. You work so hard for us. For us. The word felt like ash in my mouth. While he spoke of market shares and quarterly projections, my mind was 1,000 miles away, in a sterile conference room with Arthur Vance and a team of forensic accountants. While he complained about a subordinate's incompetence, I was reviewing encrypted files detailing shell corporations and falsified invoices. His incompetence, his criminality. He spoke of building an empire, and I smiled, knowing I was the one who had laid every single brick, and I was the one who was about to tear it all down. He'd kiss my cheek, a dry, perfunctory press of lips. It was a kiss of ownership, not affection. A brand. He was marking his territory. I'd hold my smile for a beat too long after he pulled away, letting him see the placid, untroubled surface of the pond, never letting him guess the raging currents beneath. I'd feel the spot on my skin where his lips had been, not as a warmth, but as a cold clinical point of data. It was the contact point of the deceiver and the deceived, and I knew with a certainty that chilled my bones, that I was no longer the latter. "I was thinking," he said one evening, swirling the scotch in his glass, the picture of magnanimity. "We haven't had a proper date night in a while. Let's go to Celeste on Saturday. My treat." Celeste. The restaurant where he had first told me he loved me. The restaurant where 2 years ago I'd overheard him on the phone in the lobby, telling Chloe she was a breath of fresh air. He thought the gesture was a masterstroke of romantic manipulation, a way to soothe any nascent suspicion. He didn't know I saw it for what it was, an act of profound arrogance, a desecration of a memory he assumed I still held sacred. He was using our history as a weapon against me. "Oh, Jacob, that's wonderful," I cooed, my heart a block of ice in my chest. "I'd love that. I'll wear the blue dress. The one you like. The one I had worn the night I found a receipt for a hotel I'd never been to." He beamed, his ego preening. He thought he was so clever, so in control. He saw me as a simple problem to be managed, a domestic appliance to be maintained. A little attention, a fancy dinner, and the machine would continue to run smoothly. He had no concept of the ghost in that machine. He had no idea the appliance had developed a consciousness, and it was now rewriting its own operating code. My lawyers were, at that very moment, filing a motion to freeze the assets of 3 separate offshore accounts he thought were his secret nest egg. His treat at Celeste would be paid for with money he had stolen from my company, a final bitter irony. I let him believe his little ruse was working. I let him think he was winning. The lion doesn't roar when it stalks its prey. It pads silently through the grass, its eyes fixed on the target, its every muscle coiled for the final devastating pounce. I was the lioness, and my husband, the smug, self-satisfied gazelle, was grazing peacefully, completely unaware of the looming slaughter. The charade was exhausting, a constant drain on my soul. Every smile was a carefully calibrated lie. Every nod of agreement was a betrayal of my own intelligence. I would listen to him drone on about his ambitions at Ethelred Corp., his voice full of a self-importance that was nauseating. He'd talk about the current CEO, a man I had handpicked years ago, with a casual disdain. "He's losing his edge, Ellie. The board can see it. They need new blood. Someone with vision." He was talking about himself, of course. He was so transparent, so pathetically easy to read. He believed he was on the cusp of greatness, that the promotion he so coveted was just within his grasp. The dramatic irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He was campaigning for a throne that had always been mine. He was a court jester trying on the king's crown for size, unaware the queen was watching from behind a two-way mirror, her finger hovering over the button that controlled the trap door beneath his feet. I would busy myself in the kitchen, the rhythmic chop of a knife against a wooden board a steady therapeutic outlet for my rage. Chop. That's for the missed anniversaries. Chop. For the condescending pats on the head. Chop. For the gaslighting, the lies, the way you made me question my own sanity. Chop. For my mother's ring. With each slice, I mentally dissected his life, his career, his future. I was reducing him to his component parts, preparing him for consumption. He thought I was making his favorite beef bourguignon. I was preparing my revenge. And then, when the house was finally dark and silent, when his snores were a soft, rhythmic rumble from the master bedroom, my real life would begin. The dutiful wife would dissolve like a phantom, and A.R. Kane would emerge. I would slip out of bed, my feet silent on the plush carpet. I wouldn't turn on a single light. I knew the way by heart. Down the main staircase, through the darkened living room, past the ghost of our shared life, to a discreet panel hidden behind a large antique bookcase. My thumb pressed against a small, almost invisible biometric scanner. There was a soft, near-inaudible click as heavy bolts retracted. The bookcase swung inward, revealing not a hidden safe but a doorway. Beyond it was a small, steel-lined elevator. It descended 3 floors into the bedrock beneath the house, opening into a world Jacob never knew existed. My panic room, my sanctuary, my war room. I had it built under the guise of a wine cellar expansion years ago. It was a hermetically sealed, soundproofed bunker with its own power, water, and encrypted fiber optic connection to the outside world. It was the digital fortress of Arcane. The air inside was cool and sterile, smelling of ozone and machinery. The only light came from the glow of a dozen monitors that formed a massive curved command center. The moment I sat in the leather command chair, the system recognized me. Screens flickered to life, displaying stock tickers, secure video feeds, legal documents, and private communications. On the central monitor, a simple, elegant logo appeared. ARK below it, a disembodied, synthesized voice spoke, its tone perfectly neutral. "Welcome, Miss Kane. All systems are operational." I was no longer Eliana, the woman who worried about which brand of coffee to buy. I was Kane, the woman who could cause global markets to tremble with a single command. My voice when I spoke was different here. Deeper, colder, stripped of all warmth and emotion. It was the voice of pure, dispassionate authority. Patch me through to the emergency board channel. Audio only. Scramble my signal through the usual 5 nodes. Activate the avatar. On the screen, a stylized, anonymous digital avatar materialized. A sleek, androgynous silhouette composed of shifting lines of code. This was how the world knew Arcane. A ghost in the machine. A legend. A myth. But the myth was about to become very, very real. One by one, the faces of the Ethelred Corp board members appeared in small windows on the main screen. They looked sleepy, annoyed, confused. It was 3 a.m. their time. "What is the meaning of this?" grumbled Richard Sterling, the board chairman, a portly man whose arrogance was matched only by his incompetence. "This channel is for global emergencies only." "This is a global emergency, Richard?" My synthesized voice echoed in their ears. "It pertains to the future of this company." "My company?" A stunned silence. They had only ever communicated with Arcane through encrypted emails and proxies. To be summoned like this, to hear the voice of the founder for the first time, was unprecedented. "Arcane." A woman, Evelyn Reed, stammered. Is that really you?" "It is," I replied, my eyes scanning the live data streams on my other monitors. I could see the company's real-time financial status, server loads, everything. I had more information at my fingertips than all of them combined. I have been a silent partner for 20 years. That silence is now over. I am invoking Article 7, Section 4 of the Corporate Bylaws. The Kingmaker Protocol. I am assuming direct operational control as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. The reaction was instantaneous. Outrage. Disbelief. Laughter. "That's absurd." Sterling sputtered. "The protocol is a relic, a formality. You can't just appear out of nowhere and take over. We have a CEO. We have a process. Your process has allowed a 5% drop in market share over the last 2 years," I stated flatly. A chart illustrating the decline instantly appeared on their screens. "Your process has fostered a culture of complacency. And your process has overlooked significant financial irregularities. Your process is broken. I am here to fix it." "Financial irregularities?" Another board member, a weaselly man named Peterson, asked, his voice suddenly nervous. "What are you talking about?" I let the question hang in the air for a moment. "All in due time, Mr. Peterson. First, we address the issue of my ascension. I know what you are thinking. You will fight this. You will call your lawyers. You will try to paint me as an unknown, an unstable element. You will tell the press that a faceless ghost is trying to hijack the company. We will." Sterling boomed. "We will bury you in litigation. The shareholders will revolt." I leaned forward in my chair, my own face illuminated by the cold blue light of the screens. I could feel the ice flowing through my veins. This was my element. The boardroom, not the kitchen. "No, you won't, Richard. Because you have 2 options. Option 1. You convene an emergency all-hands meeting for Friday at noon. You will announce my arrival and my new position as CEO. And you will offer your full, unequivocal support. You will all tender your resignations, which I may or may not accept. Option 2-inch. I paused. On a side monitor, I executed a pre-written algorithm. The numbers on their main screen began to shift. It was a simulation, a projection of what would happen if my personal holding company, the sole majority shareholder, began to liquidate its position. Option 2, my voice continued, as cold and sharp as a shard of glass, is that I begin selling. I will dump my entire 62% stake in Ethelred Corp onto the open market. I will start in 30 seconds. Your stock, which closed at $112 per share, will be worth less than 10 by the time the market opens. Your personal portfolios will be annihilated. The company will be insolvent before lunch. You will be presiding over the most spectacular corporate collapse in a decade. The choice is yours. You have 20 seconds to decide. I watched their faces on the screen. The bluster and arrogance evaporated, replaced by the pale, clammy sheen of pure terror. They saw the simulation. They saw the numbers plummeting into a red abyss. They weren't just board members. They were major investors. I wasn't just threatening their power. I was threatening their wealth, their legacies, their very identities. Richard Sterling's face went from puce to ashen. Evelyn Reed looked like she was going to be sick. This is extortion, Sterling whispered, his voice hoarse. This is a hostile takeover, I corrected him. And I am the hostile party. 10 seconds. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the soft hum of my servers and the frantic, terrified breathing I could hear through my high-fidelity audio feed. They were broken. I knew it. They were men and women of paper and process, and I had just shown them that I was willing to burn the entire library down. We agree, Sterling finally choked out, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. Option 1. We'll schedule the meeting. Friday, noon. Sharp, I commanded. You will send out the company-wide memo within the hour. The subject will be the future of Ethelred. The sender will be the board of directors. You will follow the script I am sending to your secure tablets right now. Any deviation, any leak, any hint of what has transpired here, and I will execute option 2 without a moment's hesitation. Am I understood? A chorus of defeated, mumbled yes was my answer. Good, I said. And with a single keystroke I cut the connection, plunging their screens back into darkness. I leaned back in my chair, the tension slowly ebbing from my shoulders. The trap was set. The pieces were in position. Jacob thought he was climbing the corporate ladder, but he didn't realize the entire ladder was a prop, and I was about to kick it out from under him in front of the whole world. He was excited about Friday. He told me he had a big meeting he couldn't miss. He thought it was his coronation. He had no idea it was his execution. And I, his loving, simple wife, would be sitting in the front row. No, not sitting. I would be on the stage, holding the axe. I looked at the array of screens, the pulsing data, the streams of power I controlled. This was me. Not the woman upstairs who baked cakes and arranged flowers. That was a ghost. This here in the cold blue light was the real Eliana Kane. And she was finally coming home. The air in the auditorium was thick with the scent of ambition and stale coffee, a uniquely corporate perfume. 1,000 people, 1,000 private anxieties and hopes, all hummed together in a low, expectant thrum. From my vantage point on a monitor backstage, a ghost in my own machine, I could see it all. I watched the sea of faces, the tailored suits and sensible blouses, the eager junior executives and the jaded veterans. They were all just components, cogs in the empire I had built in a dorm room with nothing but a revolutionary idea and a clunky prototype. And right in the middle of them, a festering rot I had allowed to grow for 20 years, was my husband. Jacob sat in the third row, a prime position for someone who believed he was about to be anointed. He looked impeccable, his suit a deep charcoal gray that I'd picked out for him last Christmas, his hair perfectly coiffed. He radiated an aura of smug confidence, the kind a man gets when he believes he has won at everything. He leaned over to whisper something in Chloe Vance's ear, his hand resting familiarly on her thigh. She laughed, a bright, tinkling sound that the microphone on the nearest speaker column unfortunately picked up. She tilted her head back, and as she did, she adjusted the lapel of his jacket with her left hand. The movement was deliberately slow, a performance for anyone who might be watching. And under the brilliant, unforgiving glare of the stage lights, my mother's ring acted like a miniature supernova. It flashed, a diamond and sapphire beacon of betrayal, sending a shard of ice-cold fire straight through the monitor and into my heart. It was a physical jolt, a reminder of why I was here. This wasn't just about a broken marriage. It was about desecration. Jacob caught the flash of light too. He smiled, a proud, possessive grin, and captured her hand, lifting it to his lips to kiss the knuckle just below my mother's legacy. He was so arrogant, so blissfully unaware. He'd told me that morning, as he adjusted his tie in the mirror, that he was expecting a major promotion. "Big things are happening, Elle," he'd said, his eyes on his own reflection, not mine. "The board is finally recognizing the real talent at this company. You should have seen the memo. Emergency all-hands meeting. They only do this for something seismic." "Oh, it was seismic, darling. You have no idea. You're standing at the epicenter of a quake you can't even feel yet." Chloe leaned her head on his shoulder, the picture of adoration. She was young, of course, young enough to see Jacob not as the mediocre middle manager he was, but as a titan of industry, a powerful man who could give her the world. A world, I noted with a bitter twist in my gut, that was funded entirely by my dividends. The irony was so thick I could taste it, metallic and sour like old blood. The house lights began to dim, and the collective chatter subsided, replaced by a focused silence. A single powerful spotlight illuminated the podium on the stage. I watched Jacob straighten his tie, a final preening gesture. He squeezed Chloe's hand, a silent promise of the victory he was sure was coming. He thought this day was about him. After 20 years of me making my world about him, I suppose it was a logical assumption. But his logic, like his fidelity, was fundamentally flawed. Arthur Vance's father, a man whose name was a cruel coincidence I had to live with every day, the current chairman of the board, Gerald Vance, walked onto the stage. He was a portly man with a smooth, practiced corporate demeanor. He adjusted the microphone, the slight feedback screeching through the auditorium for a moment, making several people wince. Jacob simply looked more self-satisfied, as if the universe itself was clearing its throat to announce his arrival. "Good morning, everyone," Gerald began, his voice booming with false warmth. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice. As you know, we at Ethelred Corporation pride ourselves on innovation, on forward momentum, and on the strength of our leadership." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. I could see Jacob puff out his chest slightly. He was eating this up. For over 2 decades, this company has grown from a fledgling startup into a global powerhouse, a leader in the tech industry. And throughout that entire journey, there has been one constant guiding force. A visionary mind working behind the scenes, shaping our destiny. A new murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the standard quarterly address. This was something different. I saw people leaning forward in their seats. Chloe looked at Jacob with wide, questioning eyes, and he gave her a subtle, calming nod as if to say, "Just wait." "For years," Gerald continued, his voice dropping for dramatic effect, "the identity of our founder has been the subject of intense speculation. A closely guarded secret. A legend known only by 3 initials. R. Kane." The name landed like a stone in a silent pool. The whispers grew louder. Arcane was a myth. A boogeyman to rival software developers. A genius figurehead spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. No one knew who they were. The press had speculated for years. Was it a reclusive tech billionaire? A consortium of investors? An early AI? The mystery was part of the brand. A brand I had carefully cultivated. "The time for shadows and speculation is over," Gerald announced, his voice rising again. "The challenges of the next decade require a leader with not just a deep understanding of our company's past, but a clear, unwavering vision for its future. Therefore, A.R. Kane has decided that the time is right to step out of the shadows and take their rightful place at the helm of this company as our new chief executive officer." A collective gasp went through the room. This was bigger than a promotion. This was a paradigm shift. I watched Jacob's face. His confident smile faltered for the first time, replaced by a flicker of confusion. This wasn't part of his plan. The spotlight wasn't swinging toward him. His brow furrowed. He was trying to solve the equation to figure out how this new variable affected his own trajectory. He still had no clue that it was about to erase him from the board entirely. "So without further ado," Gerald boomed, gesturing with a grand sweep of his arm not toward the front row, but toward the very back of the vast auditorium. "It is my profound honor to introduce you to the mind, the architect, the founder of Ethelred Corporation. Please welcome A.R. Kane." The main spotlight on the stage went dark, plunging Gerald into silhouette. A second brilliant beam of light flared to life, cutting a clean white path from the stage all the way to the main entrance doors at the back of the hall. Every head in the room, 1,000 of them, swiveled in unison. The silence was absolute, heavy with the weight of 20 years of mystery about to be solved. I watched Jacob's head turn with the rest, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated curiosity. He was witnessing history and he was excited. The fool. From the darkness of the backstage corridor, I took a single deep breath. The air was cool, sterile. I could feel the faint vibration of the building's HVAC system through the soles of my shoes. It was time. The years of playing the supportive wife, the quiet homemaker, the ghost in my own life, it was all over. The role of a lifetime was coming to an end. The heavy oak doors at the back of the auditorium swung open silently, pushed by 2 members of my security team. I stood framed in the doorway for a single calculated beat. The light was blinding, but I didn't flinch. I let them see me. Not the woman who hosted their corporate dinner parties. Not the smiling spouse in the holiday newsletters. They saw A.R. Kane. I was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, the fabric sharp and severe, tailored to my body like a second skin. My hair was pulled back in a tight, merciless chignon. I wore no jewelry, save for the simple gold band my father had given my mother on their wedding day, now on my right hand. It was my crown. Then I took the first step. My heels, steel-tipped and unforgiving, clicked on the polished marble floor. The sound was unnaturally loud in the cathedral-like silence. Click, clack. A death knell for one man's world. I started the long walk down the central aisle, the spotlight following my every move, painting me as the only person in the universe. A wave of confusion rippled through the crowd as I drew closer. I could hear the first tentative whispers, the sharp intakes of breath. "Is that Jacob's wife? What is Eliana doing?" Their confusion was a symphony to my ears. I ignored them all. My gaze was a laser, fixed on one point in the entire auditorium. The third row. My eyes locked on my husband. He was still looking at me with a dazed, uncomprehending expression. He saw his wife, the woman who packed his lunches and ironed his shirts, walking down the aisle of a corporate assembly as if she owned the place. A faint, puzzled smile played on his lips. Maybe he thought I was part of some elaborate presentation to honor him. Maybe he thought I was bringing him a forgotten document. His mind, so linear and self-absorbed, was desperately trying to fit me into a box it understood. Click, clack. I kept walking, my pace steady and relentless, a predator closing in on its prey. I was halfway down the aisle when I saw the first flicker of true understanding in his eyes. It wasn't a sudden flash of insight. It was a slow creeping dawn of horror. His brain was finally processing the impossible. Gerald Vance's words echoed in the silence. The founder A.R. Kane, our new CEO. The name. My name. Eliana. Ethelred. The initials. A.R. Kane. He had never made the connection. Why would he? In his world, I was just the wallpaper of his life. Unseen, unremarkable, and certainly not the architect of the very ground he stood on. I watched the exact moment the pieces clicked into place. I saw it happen behind his eyes. 20 years of our life together, the late nights I spent balancing the checkbook, while actually managing my portfolio, the online book club meetings that were actually clandestine board calls, the vague answers about my family inheritance that funded the company's seed round. All of it, a lifetime of lies by omission, was crashing down on him in a single silent, devastating wave. His smile didn't just fade. It was violently erased. It froze, cracked, and then melted away, leaving behind a slack-jawed mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly white. His eyes, which had been so full of arrogance moments before, were now wide with a primal fear I had never seen in him before. It was the look of a man who realizes he is not in a nightmare, but that his entire life has been a lie and the reality is far, far worse. I saw him glance at Chloe, then back at me. I saw him look at my mother's ring on her finger, the stolen symbol of my love, now a branding of his guilt. His entire body went rigid. He looked trapped. The aisle wasn't just a path to the stage, it was the gallows walk, and I was the executioner. I never broke eye contact. I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to understand that the quiet, accommodating woman he had systematically belittled and betrayed was the god of his universe. And she had just passed judgment. As I reached the front of the auditorium, I finally allowed myself a small, cold smile. It didn't reach my eyes. My eyes were promising him nothing but ruin. I ascended the short flight of stairs to the stage, the clicks of my heels now sharp and definitive on the wooden platform. Gerald Vance, his face a perfect picture of professional deference, stepped back from the podium and offered it to me. I walked past him, my movements fluid and confident. I owned this stage. I had always owned it. The silence in the room was now suffocating. 1,000 people held their breath. I gripped the sides of the podium, my knuckles white. The microphone was cool to the touch. I leaned in, my lips almost brushing against the metal mesh. I let the silence stretch for another 5 seconds, an eternity of tension. I scanned the audience one last time, my gaze sweeping over the board members, the executives, the employees. Then my eyes returned to Jacob. He looked like a statue carved from salt, brittle and about to crumble. "Good morning," I said. My voice, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system I had personally approved the budget for, was calm, clear, and as cold as a burial shroud. It filled every corner of the vast hall, a stark contrast to the chaos raging in my husband's mind. "For those who don't know me," I continued, my eyes locked on his, a predator toying with its meal, "my name is Eliana Kane." I let the name hang in the air, a final damning sentence. I let the weight of it, the impossible truth of it, settle over him. I let him hear the two names he thought he knew so well, Eliana and Kane, finally fused together into the weapon that would destroy him. His face was now beyond white. It was translucent, a ghastly shade of gray. His mouth opened, a perfect silent O of disbelief. A choked, gurgling sound caught in his throat, but no words came out. He was trying to breathe, but his lungs refused to cooperate. He gasped, a harsh, ragged sound that was shockingly loud in the stillness. Then, his left hand shot up, clutching violently at his chest, clawing at the fine fabric of the suit I had bought him. His eyes rolled back in his head, the terror replaced by a blank, unfocused shock. He swayed on his feet for a moment, a tree severed at its roots, before collapsing to the floor in a graceless, boneless heap. He hit the ground with a sickening thud, his chair clattering sideways as he went down. For a single frozen second there was nothing. Then chaos erupted. People screamed. Chairs scraped against the floor as employees jumped to their feet. Chloe shrieked his name, a high-pitched, panicked sound. The dam of corporate decorum had burst, and a flood of raw human panic washed through the auditorium. The age of A.R. Kane had begun. The chaos that erupted was a distant, muffled sound, like listening to a storm from behind thick glass. The frantic calls for a medic, the gasps that rippled through the auditorium, the scraping of chairs as people stood to get a better look. It all reached me, but it didn't touch me. My world had narrowed to a single point. The man on the floor, the man who had been my husband, whose face was a mask of waxy, ashen shock. He was clutching his chest, his impeccably tailored suit suddenly looking like a costume on a fallen puppet. The paramedics moved with a practiced, urgent grace, a whirlwind of blue uniforms and silver equipment around the wreckage of Jacob's life. I watched them work from the stage, the microphone still warm in my hand. There was no triumph in my heart, no surge of vengeful glee. There was only a profound, chilling calm. The calm of a decision finally executed, of a long festering wound finally lanced. I placed the microphone back on the lectern with a soft, definitive click that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. I walked down the short set of stairs, my heels silent on the plush carpet. The sea of stunned faces parted for me as I moved, a silent automatic deference. I didn't look at any of them. My focus was singular. I knelt beside the gurney as they finished strapping Jacob in. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, searching. They found mine, and in them, I saw the full, undiluted horror of his realization. He knew. He finally, truly knew who he had been married to, who he had betrayed. He tried to speak, but only a dry, rattling sound came out. I leaned in close, my breath a warm whisper against his cold, damp skin, making sure my voice was a private poison meant only for him. "You're fired," I said, my tone as gentle as a lullaby. "For theft. Grand larceny to be precise. The internal audit is quite thorough." His eyes widened, a fresh wave of panic washing over the medical shock. "Oh, and I'll be sending the police to collect my mother's ring from your mistress as evidence." I let that sink in, watching the last vestiges of his arrogance crumble into dust. It is, after all, stolen property. I stood up, smoothing the front of my suit jacket. The world came back into focus. I turned to our head of security, a man named Marcus who looked as if he'd been carved from granite. His expression was one of pure, unadulterated shock, but his training held. He was waiting for an order. I gave him one. My gaze flickered over to Chloe, who was standing frozen by her chair, her face a pale, confused mess. The ring, my ring, glinted on her finger under the harsh stage lights, a vulgar little star. I pointed a single, steady finger at her. "Escort that woman off my property," I said, my voice carrying with the effortless authority I had suppressed for 2 decades. "Her network access, her keycard, everything is terminated. Effective immediately." Marcus simply nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He and another guard began to move toward her, their movements calm but implacable. Chloe began to stammer, to protest, but her words were lost in the renewed murmur of the crowd as they wheeled Jacob's gurney out of the main hall. I didn't watch either of them go. They were ghosts already, fading footnotes in a story that was now, finally, mine to write. The story, as I knew it would, exploded. In the hours and days that followed, it became the only thing anyone in the financial world, and soon the wider world, was talking about. Headlines screamed from every news site and television screen. The ghost of Ethelred. Housewife or mastermind? From kitchen to boardroom. The incredible story of Eliana Kane. Billionaire founder A.R. Kane reveals herself, ousts cheating husband in shocking corporate coup. They painted me as a vengeful wife, a scorned woman, a corporate Medusa. They tried to fit me into a box they could understand. I refused to let them. I didn't hide. I didn't issue a sterile press release. I took control. I granted a single exclusive interview to the most respected financial journalist in the country, a woman known for her incisive, no-nonsense approach. We sat not in a stuffy boardroom, but in the company's innovation lab, surrounded by the future I had envisioned from my dorm room all those years ago. I didn't speak of betrayal. I didn't mention Jacob's name more than once, and then only in the context of a former executive under investigation. I didn't give the world the salacious personal drama it craved. Instead, I spoke of Ethelred. I spoke of the core code I wrote myself. I spoke of the ethical principles upon which I founded the company, principles that had been eroded over time by a culture of profit over people. I laid out my vision for the next decade. A return to innovation, a commitment to sustainable technology, and a corporate culture that valued integrity as much as it valued profit margins. I wasn't the wife getting revenge. I was the founder, the creator, the architect, and I was reclaiming my house. The narrative shifted instantly. The market, which had been bracing for a scandal-induced collapse, didn't just stabilize, it roared to life. Investors love a good story, but they love a strong leader more. Ethelred's stock soared to an all-time high. I was no longer a scorned wife in their eyes. I was a visionary. A legend. The legal documents detailing Jacob's downfall arrived at my lawyer's office in a series of thick, satisfying manila envelopes. The divorce was swift and brutal. The prenuptial agreement I had insisted upon, the one he had laughed at as unromantic, was an ironclad fortress. He was left with nothing but his own personal debt and the clothes on his back. The criminal charges were even more damning. The 5 years of embezzlement, the fake vendor accounts, the trail of illicit transfers. It was all there, meticulously documented by the forensic accountants I had hired. He faced years in prison. He lost his career, his reputation, his freedom, his mistress, who quickly distanced herself from him once the money was gone, and the life he had stolen. He lost everything. And the most tragic part, the part that almost resembled a Greek tragedy, was that he had it all in his grasp. He had the love of the woman who owned the kingdom, but he couldn't see the woman for the wallpaper. He just saw a quiet, convenient housekeeper, and that fatal blindness was his ruin. A few weeks later, a detective from the city's property crime division delivered a small sealed evidence bag to my new office. The CEO's office. It was a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the sprawling, glittering expanse of the city, a view I had earned twice over. Inside the plastic bag was the ring. My mother's ring. I signed the release form, my signature Eliana Kane. A firm, confident stroke. I slit the bag open and let the ring fall into my palm. It felt cool and heavy, a familiar weight. For a moment, looking at the familiar twist of the gold, the deep fire of the center stone, a pang of grief shot through me. Not for Jacob, but for the 20 years I had lost playing a part. The 20 years I had spent shrinking myself to fit into his small, narrow world. I mourned the woman I could have been all along, but the feeling passed, replaced by something harder, brighter. I took the ring and, without a moment's hesitation, I slid it onto the fourth finger of my right hand. It was no longer a symbol of a broken promise, a desecrated vow. On this hand it was something else entirely. It was a signet, a crown, a testament to the unbreakable strength of my mother, and a constant glittering reminder of the day I stopped being a ghost in my own life. I stood at the window, watching the endless river of headlights flowing through the canyons of New York. The throne was never his to give. It was simply mine to take.